The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Onda at the CDC, and together they asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Those include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every yes, you would get a point on your ACE score. And then what they did was they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. Two things. Number one, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America.
Beans, y'all. My name is Andrew Defy, a.k.a. the Gorilla Poet Laureate, a.k.a. the Hoodie God, a.k.a. Spittin' Quarantino, a.k.a. I wear my sunglasses at night because my eyes are as sensitive as my heart is, y'all. And I am so excited tonight. We are just going to get right into it. Tonight is a really big night for Masked Up and the half of the internet that watches. We've got California's first Surgeon General in history and medical superhero Nadine Burke Harris on the show tonight. In case you don't know her incredible work before she became her Surgeon Generalness, she founded San Francisco Center for Youth Wellness, which became a national leader in pediatric medicine and especially ACEs. What are ACEs, you say? I'm glad you asked. ACEs is short for Adverse Childhood Experiences. These can include physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, violence, and a host of other things that traumatize children. Dr. Burke Harris's innovative work in the ACEs field includes her book, The Deepest Well, Healing the Long-Term Effects of Childhood Adversity, which the New York Times called indispensable. She is not only a history maker and award-winning physician, but she was also one of the most fun interviews I've ever done on this show. So stick around for that. And we did not forget it is Pride Month. So a little later in the show, we're going to get into the science of being transgender with Gigi Gorgeous and the ASAP science team. But first, like we always do at this time, it's the Weekly Rona update. Shout out to Leonardo Castaneda for the East Bay Times for this. California is averaging the fewest new daily COVID-19 cases since March 31st of 2020. That's a time when testing was limited and pandemic lockdowns were just 2 weeks old. On Friday, counties reported 1,062 new COVID-19 cases for a 7-day average of 863 cases. That's the lowest it's been since the end of March last year, when the state was averaging 838 daily cases. This time, the success in keeping down new cases has been driven in large part by vaccinations. Among Californians 18 and older, 70.5% have at least one vaccine dose and 55.2% are fully vaccinated. Let's go, y'all. Among residents 65 and older, a population targeted early for vaccination, 91.1% have at least one shot and 72.3% are fully inoculated. So far, California has administered 38 million vaccine doses. That's 81% of the supply delivered to the state. We're averaging about 126,408 daily shots to be specific. That's slightly less than half the number of injections California was averaging a couple weeks ago. With lower case rates, fewer patients are hospitalized with the virus. On Thursday, there were 1,062 patients hospitalized with confirmed cases of COVID-19, a 1.8% decline from the preceding day. On January 6th, during a massive winter surge, there were 21,923 patients hospitalized with confirmed cases, just to give you a little bit of perspective. California also reported 260 patients in intensive care unit beds with confirmed COVID-19 cases on Thursday. That's a 3.3% decline from the preceding day. These same trends have also played out in COVID-19 deaths, as we're seeing those numbers go down throughout the state as well. The next time that we see you, the mask mandate will be lifted, y'all. And who knows how long after that we'll retire the Weekly Rona update segment of this show. Finally, what a wild ride it's been, y'all. It's been a real honor to report the facts as best we could every week to y'all and hopefully bring some comfort, joy, and even laughter into your lives during the pandemic. I'm so glad we made it together, y'all. Now let's get on to the latest health news. Since we are talking about ACEs tonight, we wanted to talk about this new study from the University of Michigan published in the Journal of Pediatrics that actually found that adverse childhood experiences and spanking have similar associations when it comes to early behavioral problems. The study included the following as ACEs: physical and emotional abuse and neglect, mother's exposure to intimate partner violence, parental mental health issues, parental substance abuse or incarceration, and parental death. The study compared the behavioral patterns of 3 to 5 year olds in 2,380 families and found that both ACEs and spanking at 3 years were unique risk factors for increased externalizing behavior problems at age 5. The comparison between the two was, and I quote, statistically indistinguishable. Findings conclude adverse childhood experiences and spanking have similar effects on children 3 to 5 years old, which supports calls to consider physical punishment as a form of adverse childhood experience. The findings also underscore the importance of assessing exposure to ACEs and physical punishment and providing appropriate intervention to children at risk. Thanks to Doctors Julie Ma, Shauna J. Lee, and Andrew Grogan-Kaler for this. Y'all, her hard work with children and ACEs has made ripples throughout the medical community for years, and that's why she's the Golden State's first ever Surgeon General. Before we get into our interview, I want to properly introduce her to those of you who may not be up on game. Here's the one and only Dr. Nadine Burke Harris before she became her Surgeon Generalness.
And one of the things that they teach you in public health school is that if you're a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write that prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics, or you can walk over and say, what the hell is in this well?
Without further ado, let's get to it and welcome groundbreaking pediatrician, author, superhero, mother, and essential oil maker. You'll be surprised. Her Surgeon Generalness, Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, y'all. Her Surgeon Generalness is with us. Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, and the first Surgeon General in California history. So we've got a lot to talk about. I'm so excited, if you could not tell. So I guess let's start off with the most relevant. Can we get a vaccine progress report? Are you hopeful that we're getting close to community immunity?
I am hopeful. I am hopeful. So as of June 3rd, we have administered more than 37 million doses of vaccine. So what that means is that about 64% of our eligible population, so that's those 12 and up, have been at least partially vaccinated. And you may have heard the governor just announced the vaccine incentive plan, Vax for the Win, to help us get even closer to community immunity. So I think given our progress so far and this new incentive plan to really help to recognize that, you know, for a lot of folks, there are folks who haven't been vaccinated because, you know, they're working two jobs, or they don't have transportation, or they have a hard time getting there. So being able to give a $50 gift card to help those folks who need a little extra help being able to get that time off, or making it really having that little extra incentive. I think that we are going to meet the president's goal of 70% at least partially vaccinated by July 4th.
That's so good to hear. So you're California's first Surgeon General. On top of that, you landed in the middle of a global pandemic. So number one, like, what is that? The whole experience just been like? I imagine it's a whirlwind. And also, can you tell us a little bit about what Surgeon Generals do other than putting the note on the cigarette packs?
Yeah. So, you know, so to answer your last question first, I think that what a Surgeon General does typically is tell you about the public health crisis that you didn't know was a public health crisis, right? So it's, you know, among the famous Surgeons General of the past, you think about C. Everett Koop, you think about that cigarette label warning, because, you know, you remember back in the day, doctors were advertising cigarettes, right? Yeah. And what we do as Surgeons General is we take the data and the research and the science about what affects our health, and we communicate that to the public. We also advise the administration. So I advise Governor Newsom on public health, on public health issues, and I'm a spokesperson. So one of the big things is to get out there and speak to the public. I clearly do not have ESP because the COVID pandemic, that was a doozy. You know, it has been a really remarkable experience. I think it's definitely the hardest I have ever worked in my entire life. There was a moment when I was kind of thinking back nostalgically to my medical residency as like a time when I was working less. So it was pretty intense. I think everyone across government was really all hands on deck. But it was also just kind of this incredibly beautiful experience, because that's one of the things that I love the most about being a doctor, about being in government service, is that opportunity to serve, is the opportunity to help communities be healthier, to empower people with the information that they need to protect their health and protect their loved ones. And obviously, during the pandemic, there was a lot of opportunity to be of service and to really witness others being of service and showing up in this extraordinary way. And so I'm really grateful that I got a chance to be a part of that.
We thank you for your service, for sure. So you are a pediatrician by training. How has that influenced your perspective and priorities as Surgeon General?
So In a couple of really significant ways. So one directly related to COVID and to the pandemic. I started my professional career as a pediatrician in one of San Francisco's most underserved neighborhoods called Bayview Hunters Point. Shout out to all my HP family.
Yep. We love y'all on the point.
Yes. And so when I started the clinic, the Bayview Child Health Center, one of the first things that I set a goal for myself, and the hospital that I work for set a goal for me, was to improve immunization rates. And when we looked at the data of the kids who were coming to my clinic, before they came to my clinic, only 50% of them were up to date on their immunizations. And so my job was to bring that number up. Within 2 years, we got that number to consistently between 96 and 100%, right? And all of those techniques and tips and tricks are, and really some of the important factors, what are the things that make it hard for people to get vaccinated, right? Like, that's how I know that sometimes people don't get vaccinated because they don't have transportation, or they're working 2 jobs and all of these things, and understanding, using, for example, incentives like the gift card, that was something that we did in my clinic to help to bring our vaccination rates up, and particularly for our most vulnerable communities. Right? Because that was one thing in my role as the chair of the Community Vaccine Advisory Committee for the state of California. One of the things that was a huge focus was around vaccine equity, right? And making sure that, the difference between December, when we were looking at 20,000, 40,000, 50,000 cases a day, and where we are today, where we're looking at cases in the hundreds per day, right? The big difference wasn't some amazing medical treatment or some medication or anything like that. It was vaccines. And making sure that every community has equal access to that life-saving resource. That was really, I felt like I had an opportunity to bring my past work as a pediatrician, vaccinating vulnerable communities, and really bringing up those rates of vaccination and strategies. So that was a big one. The other thing that I would say is that, going back to the role of the Surgeon General to alert us to the public health crisis that we didn't know was a public health crisis. Listen, before COVID even came on the scene, one of my big areas of focus, my 3 big areas of focus, was early childhood, health equity, and adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress. And then COVID came. And guess what? We're all stressed out. A lot of people lost their jobs. People are having more mental health challenges. A lot of people who were sober have relapsed, right? Like, all of this, this pandemic was one huge stressor. And so a lot of the research around how stress, and especially adversity during childhood, affects our health and development over the long term is even more important now than it ever has been before. So yeah, that's the big thing right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was hoping that we were going to get into ACEs and your work with adverse childhood experiences. Some worked it out already. What impact has the pandemic had on children's mental health, and have certain groups of children suffered more than others during the pandemic?
Yeah. So to answer that question, I want to go back and just explain a little bit about how ACEs lead to negative health and behavioral health outcomes. So when any one of us experiences something scary or stressful, right? It activates our stress response. It activates our fight or flight response. And, everyone's experienced this. You have a near miss when you're driving down the freeway, or you see some shady dude who looks like they're coming up on you, or you're walking and a dog jumps at you, or whatever it is, right? Something scary happens, and we all recognize that heart pounding feeling. That heart pounding feeling is actually our stress response. It's stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol preparing us to either fight, right, or run away. And that's normal. But when that happens too often, or in a way that's prolonged, and we don't have the adequate caregiving, right? Someone who tells us that we're safe, we're okay, helps to keep our lives stable, who's able to nurture us, then the stress response has a hard time shutting itself off. And when it doesn't shut itself off, especially in children, right, what happens is that actually changes the way our brains and bodies function. So it changes the way that our brains develop. It leads to inflammation in our bodies and increased risk of all of these different health conditions. And so all of these changes, the prolonged activation of the stress response and all of the health the health consequences as a result, that's what we now call the toxic stress response. And what we know in the pandemic was super stressful. And if there's one of the most powerful things, there are actually a bunch of things that we can do to help to regulate our stress response. But one of the most powerful things is connecting to these safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments. Well, what did the pandemic do? Stress people out and make it so that you can't connect to your safe and stable relationships and environments. So if you're a kid, you're not going to school, you're not going to your faith community, you're not doing your after school sports, you're not doing the music or whatever it is was your thing that helped you deal with your stress release, right? Like all of those pieces. And so we saw an increase in stress and adversity and less access to these supportive interventions. And as a result, it's not surprising. Some of the things that we've seen is, so the thing that we're seeing right away where there's clear data is the impact on mental health, right? So both kids and adults are struggling more with mental health than we were before the pandemic, like a lot more. There was one study that showed that from the Kaiser Family Foundation that in adults went from 11% reporting like depression or anxiety in 2019, right? It was June of 2019 to 41% reporting depression or anxiety in January of 2021. Right? Like that's a massive jump. So we see that in the adults. And then in kids, we're seeing similar data where there's increases in depression, anxiety, other behavioral health conditions. And so that gives us some information about how important it is right now for us to be really recognizing the science and doing stuff to prevent. Right. And so that's a big part of the reason I'm really excited. The governor has proposed $4 billion to create a comprehensive children and youth mental health system in California. And like, honestly, we already know that our kids are at risk. If we don't, like, I almost feel like there's not an option here, because if we don't do it, there's going to be serious consequences for the health and well-being of our kids for decades to come.
Absolutely. And I mean, that it leads directly into my next question of what policies can we implement to address these issues surrounding children's mental health?
So,
because I'm just coming to you for all of the answers. I know.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm here for. But no, seriously, this is a place where I'm so excited that California is leading the way. So to start off, even before the pandemic, in January of 2020, California launched a nation-leading effort called ACEs Aware to train our healthcare providers, right? So, and a lot of the times people think about it and they're like, oh yeah, you're training therapists, right? Or psychiatrists or psychologists. And it's like, let's be clear, by the time someone sees a psychologist or a psychiatrist, the effect of that trauma, the adversity, the, everything that they've experienced on their brain and body is so substantial that now they have a problem. Mm-hmm. So what we did in California was we trained primary care providers, pediatrician, family medicine clinicians, right? Even adult doctors, OBGYNs, right? Maternity care professionals to screen for adverse childhood experiences, right? Because we have this really, really strong data from the CDC that, adverse childhood experiences lead to this increased risk of all these different health conditions, to screen and actually do evidence-based interventions to help to regulate the stress response and prevent long-term harm. Right. So we launched that in January of 2020. We have trained almost 18,000 healthcare providers across the state. Right. This is like the biggest effort of its kind. And so that's pretty amazing. But here's the thing, and this is where the policy, my office released a report in December called Roadmap for Resilience. And it literally is this, it's a roadmap for resilience. And so one of the things that it shows is it takes all that science and data and shows, okay, early detection improves outcomes. That is unequivocal. The data is so clear. There's a scientific consensus there. So we're doing this, training our healthcare providers to screen so we can do early detection and early intervention. But guess what? If your doctor asks you, hey, I'm going to ask you these questions about ACEs, you're going to be like, what are ACEs? What are you talking about? Why are you screening me? I've never been screened for ACEs from a doctor before. So that's why another important thing that we did was we worked in partnership with an organization called the ACE Resource Network to create a public awareness campaign to help people understand what are adverse childhood experiences? How do they affect our health? What can you do if you yourself have experienced ACEs, or you're an adult and you experienced ACEs when you were a kid and you want to understand, how do I prevent myself from handing this down to my kids? Right?
Are we just healing generational trauma? All right, let's go.
That is what we are doing. And so that is called numberstory.org. And it's really about, it helps people understand the story of their number. And it also helps them understand that you get to write how your story ends. You get to decide, right? And when we understand it, then and we understand that there are lots of healing interventions, right? So it's not that like, oh, you experienced ACEs and then now there's nothing that you can do, but really connect people to the resources of how to heal. That's what that's all about. It's incredibly exciting. And then, as I mentioned, that is like just the beginning. Then on top of that, we have this, $4 billion comprehensive children and youth behavioral health proposal right now that is all about building a world-class behavioral health system in California. And so one of the things that we see is, for example, school-based services. Okay, so you have a child or a young person who you've identified who needs services. Okay, so that means you're going to have the parent leave work, go pick up the kid at school. The kid's missing school. You're going to take them to their appointment. Then you're going to wait for an hour, and then you're going to take them back, and you're going to do that once a week. I'm sorry, how am I going to keep my job? Right? So this is why, like, literally using our experience and expertise around what are some of the best practices, providing school-based care, helping to train our frontline healthcare providers, like our primary care providers, our pediatricians, our family medicine docs, on to have the skills to help to better recognize and support some of these pieces, reducing stigma by doing public education, but then also doing the other things that are necessary, providing more support for our behavioral health workforce. It's literally from like beginning to end. It is from prevention all the way to making sure that people have the best care, the most evidence-based care, and more access to, beds when they do need to be hospitalized or something along those lines. So it's pretty boss.
Absolutely.
My official Surgeon General diagnosis is pretty boss. And it's something I'm really proud of that we're doing in California.
Yeah, it's so huge, and I love just how upstream your work seems to be focused, right? Like, let's go back to these adverse childhood experiences. I'm always telling the homies that they all need to get into therapy. You know what I mean? So look, she nodded. That means the Surgeon General say you need to be in therapy, y'all.
Oh, for sure. Let me just tell you, do you want to know what got me through this pandemic as a Surgeon General with 4 kids who were homeschooling,
Oof.
right? Therapy, exercise, meditation, it's going for walks, being out in nature. All of that stuff is healing. And I don't write all this stuff, look all the research, write all this stuff and put it in the Surgeon General's report for somebody else to use. These are all things like, I do not miss an appointment with my therapist, okay? Because
real.
Yeah, because I'm a mom, right? And one of the things that's so important, and people ask me all the time, how do we as parents, right? Like, how do we support our kids? How do we support our kids just generally? How do we support our kids through this crazy pandemic? How do we support our kids' well-being? And the thing that I always say, the most important ingredient for a healthy child is a healthy caregiver. I'm going to say that again.
Let's go.
The most important ingredient for a healthy child is a healthy caregiver. So that means so that literally is, all of the things that we do for ourselves. Self-care is not selfish, right? Figuring out how we regulate ourselves so that we can be healthy, so that then whatever shows up for our kids, like, we can be that safe and stable and nurturing source of buffering for our kids. Because we have that superpower. Right. So but we have to make sure that we are well supported in order to be able to do that. And one of the things I feel really strongly about, parents and caregivers support the kids. And when I say parents, I'm talking about step parents. I'm talking about,
grandparents, all the parents,
adoptive parents, all kinds of parents. But we as caregivers, grandparents, we support the kids. Right? Because that is the key ingredient. But the community has to support the parent. Right? Because it's a symbiosis. And if we as a community don't support our parents and caregivers, right, that just makes everything harder. And so that's really the public health approach. Is that how do we not wait until the wheels have fallen off the cart? How do we really create the systems, the environments, the communities that allow people to be able to thrive?
And so you said earlier in the interview, I don't have ESP, but this is now twice that she's pulled the next question before I even got to ask it. So my next question was about supporting our children. So I just want to ask specifically, and as a mom, as well as being her Surgeon Generalness, what can we do to support our kids like returning to school and trying to get back to like quote unquote normal life?
Yeah.
Like what do you think the key is there?
So the key is really tuning into them, right? On just checking in, understanding what is going on for them, and recognizing that when kids are struggling, it can be, you can see it in their behavior. For some kids, you can see it in their behavior. For some kids, they might have trouble sleeping. For some kids, you might see a change in their appetite, or they might have tummy aches, right? So it shows up in different ways, depending on their age, depending on their development, all of that kind of stuff. But in addition to what I talked about around making sure that we are well regulated, so doing our own self-care, it's really about helping them make meaning about what's happening. So kids have all kinds of questions, and sometimes as adults, we're not really sure how to answer it, right? It's like, okay, little kids haven't been vaccinated. What do I say about them going back to school? And just helping them understand that they're safe, helping them understand what they can do to protect themselves and to protect others, and really helping them make meaning of what's going on. The other thing that's really important for kids, and honestly for adults too, but like predictability, routines, all of those things. So these can be incredibly helpful in supporting our kids to adjust to whatever the next new normal is. And frankly, there's some things that we don't know, right? We don't know how it's going to go. And really being honest about that and saying, I don't know. Like, my little ones, my two little ones are 5 and 9, and our big boys are 18-year-old twins who just graduated high school. I'm so proud of them.
Congratulations.
But, our big ones are vaccinated, and our little ones are wondering, well, when are we going to get vaccinated? Right. Mm-hmm. And the answer is, we're not sure yet, but here's what we can do to protect ourselves in the meantime. Mm-hmm. Right. So this is what it's all about. It's about acknowledging the things that we can't control, and then also focusing on the things that we can control, and, really giving them a chance to voice all their fears, their worries, and then letting them know how they're safe and they're okay.
24 karat gold. Thank you. So I got one last question, and it is the question that I ask everyone that comes on this show, and I'm so excited to hear your answer for this because I know it's going to be a good one. Where are you finding your joy these days?
I do have a lot of joy in my life, in a couple of places. So my number one answer is in my garden. I am a super crazy gardener. The flowers behind me are from my garden. Like I grow all kinds of flowers and food and all that stuff. And then I cook and I eat and I, make stuff for the kids. And I literally took it a degree of difficulty higher. I actually got a distiller. And so I'm now distilling and making essential oils. That's where I am.
All right.
So yeah, that's a little insight into my personality. And then, and also, my kids, my husband, I just have an amazing family, and I really prioritize spending quality time with them. So, we have our no device times, and just time where we get to plug in and have fun and play, and it's hilarious. And honestly, the last thing I would say is I get a lot of joy out of service. I get so that balance for me between the service work that makes me feel incredibly purposeful with the family and a little bit of me time, a little bit of garden time, I'm good.
I love it. So just thank you so much for taking the time with us and really walking us through some of these really like big issues. And can I just tell you, for me personally, it's so awesome to hear someone in your position. So when we think of the Surgeon General, then we think of the government, and it's these cold white walls, and there's no humanity there. And it's a very like I wasn't expecting to hear about essential oils, is what I'm saying. Right? I wasn't expecting to hear about like get in the garden, right? A lot of times it's about medicine, and it isn't about this 360 degrees. And I'm so hyped that our Surgeon General is like about the 360 degrees of health, and self-care and pushing that out there.
So do you want to hear something really boss
Yes.
right now? Getting in the garden is medicine. Right. And I'm going to tell you, so when researchers put EEGs, an electroencephalogram, on people's heads and measure their brain activity and their stress activation when they're in an urban setting versus when they're out in nature, what they see is that your brain activity when you are connected to nature is in a more calm and less stress reactive way. So literally, when we talk about like, oh, is it getting out in the garden or is it medicine? Getting out in the garden is medicine, and the science behind it is strong.
We love it. We love it. Oh, thank you so much. And we're gonna have to have you back on just so we can talk gardening and essential oils.
Oh my God, yes. I'll tell you all my secrets.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing all the work that you're going to continue doing.
All right. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. The National Survey of Children's Health is a yearly nationally representative survey of children ages 0 to 18 in the United States that includes an ACEs question that asks parents, to the best of your knowledge, has your child ever been treated or judged unfairly because of their race or ethnic group? This question attempts to measure individual interpersonal racism or discrimination. Per the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, this means treating someone unfavorably because they are of a certain race or because of personal characteristics associated with race. According to the 2016-2018 National Survey of Children's Health, 10% of Black non-Hispanic children ages 0 to 18 years have experienced individual and interpersonal racism. This equates to at least 916,803 Black children in the United States. By age, this includes about 2% of infants and 20% of teenagers. However, since this survey is reported by parents on their child's experiences, the true rate is likely much, much higher. Other studies focusing in detail on perceived self-reported racism and discrimination find that rates are around 90% for Black children. When individual interpersonal racism is added to the other 9 ACEs measured in the National Survey of Children's Health to create the ACE score, a pattern emerges comparing children in the U.S. by race and ethnicity. Black children are more likely to have higher ACE scores compared to white children, and Black children are overrepresented among children with 2 or more ACEs. So Pride Month is going strong, and we wanted to delve into what scientists have been finding out about the hearts and minds of our transgendered family. Gigi Gorgeous and the ASAP Science crew put together this awesome video that explains some of the science behind how chromosomes work in utero and being born transgender.
There's a lot of misinformation out there about what it means to be transgender, but recently scientists have begun to look more closely into the neurology, physiology, and psychology behind it.
So today we're going to break down what science does know in a respectful and educational way. Hey guys, I'm Gigi Gorgeous, and today I'm here with ASAP Science to break down the science of being transgender. Before we get too deep into it, we have to look at your genetic sex, or the chromosomes you have. These were determined right at fertilization, when the sperm cell from your father, which carries an X or a Y chromosome, fused with the egg from your mother, which carries an X chromosome.
But until 6 or 7 weeks after fertilization, both XY and XX embryos have identical gonads. Around 7 weeks, the male sex organs start to develop because of a gene on the Y chromosome called SRY. It causes cells to become more specialized, and these cells create testosterone, which in turn triggers the development of structures like the penis and scrotum, while other cells block female development by degenerating the female ducts. However, in female development, because there is no Y chromosome with the SRY gene, these ducts stay intact and become the uterus, cervix, upper vagina, and the oviduct with the help of estrogen and chemicals secreted by the early kidney. But it's not always that simple. There are sometimes even rare combinations like XXY, XXX, XXYY, etc., and even people with XX chromosomes that develop male genitals and characteristics due to a piece of the Y chromosome breaking off and switching places to an X chromosome.
But sexual differentiation in the brain actually happens much later than gonadal differentiation. And yes, although controversial, male and female brains have structural and functional differences between each other. Studies have found that males generally have a larger cerebrum, cerebellum, and hippocampus, while females have higher density left frontal lobes and larger volumes in the right frontal lobes. So what exactly do we see when we look at the brain of a transgender person? Several studies have shown that transgender brains are both structurally and functionally more similar to their experienced gender identity than their biological sex.
One study found that trans women who, despite being assigned male at birth, had a smaller female-sized structure in the hypothalamus. MRI scans also show the brain structures of trans people to be more similar in thickness to their experienced gender and not their sex. Finally, the pheromone androstenedione causes different hypothalamic responses in male and female brains. And when individuals with gender dysphoria were exposed to it, the hypothalamic response matched their perceived gender rather than their sex. These studies help to highlight how masculinization or feminization of the gonads is not always the same as the brain, and that there's a difference between your sex or your anatomy and your gender or how we perceive our own bodies. There also seems to be a genetic component to transgender identity. Looking at family histories, gender identity incongruence seems to run in the family, meaning they may be inherited. The CYP17 gene, which controls the body's level of sex hormones, has a changed allele that is expressed frequently in trans men. Although more research could be done, scientists are currently looking at over 3 million DNA markers for transgender identity to investigate any genetic link for being trans.
Even though scientific studies validate the experience of transgender people, they're still suffering from more depression and anxiety than the general public. The risk of suicide is more prominent in transgender people who have been rejected by their family, discriminated in the workplace, or in healthcare. Suicide risks seem to decrease after gender transitioning, suggesting that gender dysphoria can cause an extreme amount of emotional pain, even to the point of suicide. If you, a family member, or a friend is suffering from gender dysphoria, there are a few links in the description for more information.
Thank you so much, Gigi, for being part of this video. It means so much, and we're happy that you're here to do this with us.
Oh, well, thank you guys for using your channel, your platform, validating transgender experiences with science, which just brings us closer to equality.
Absolutely. If you guys want to check out Gigi's channel, we'll put links in the description or on the screen somewhere. Otherwise, you can subscribe for more science here every week, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
That brings us to the end of another legendary episode of Masked Up. We want to thank the half the internet that tunes in every week. We could not do it without y'all. I'm Andrew Defy. As always, shout out and big thanks to Netta, Allison, and the rest of the Masked Up Show crew. Like Mozzie said, health is wealth, and I need my bag. Remember, covered faces don't get cases. Health doesn't come from a pharmacy, y'all. Till next time.